Welcome to Deciphering Growth, the show that explores mental health from every angle. We bring you conversations with personal opinions, stories, and practical tips. We aim to break down the stigma and help you live your best life. So please sit back and let's dive in. Before we begin, we want to remind our listeners that this podcast represents the opinions of Tiffany Graves, Eric Stone, and the show's guests. The content here should not be used as medical advice. It is for informational purposes only, and please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. This podcast should not be in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing a standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. There is no guarantee regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establish a doctor-patient relationship.
Good morning, everybody. How are you guys today?
Yes, good morning.
Good.
We're here. It's a Tuesday. A little disappointed we didn't get the snow we were supposed to get, but.
Well, we have a special guest on today to wrap up our series discussing ADHD topics. So we have a very professional, qualified expert to come in today. So Dave Payne. And so Dave, I know you are doing lots of cool stuff, but can you just maybe introduce yourself, some of the things you are doing or working on right now?
Sure. I'm Dave Payne, LPCC. I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor. I have ADHD. I was diagnosed when I was in 10th grade, went through the full battery of psychological tests and whatnot. And I love helping adults with ADHD. I also like working with couples, and so I get a fair amount of couples in which one or both partners have ADHD. I provide telehealth to people in Florida, Ohio, and Kentucky. And if you want to, you're welcome to check out my website, davepaynecounseling.com. That's DAVEPAYNE counseling.com.
I love it. I love that your name is the website. Hopefully you know your name at the right. If you have to type it out, I could see me being like Eric. I
tell people like that name came to me in a dream. It was like, wow, inspiration. What should I call my business?
Oh my God. I felt like I was so creative when I started my practice, and I used the tree logo, and then I actually started looking at everyone else. Like, I feel like, I don't know, maybe half, I'm calling myself half of the logos involve some sort of tree or branch, which I get it because we're all talking about growth, but for a while I was really like, wow, I really did something unique here. It's not the case. Well, we are so glad to have you, Dave, on today. And so I know we have a few different directions we want to go, but I would kind of like maybe throw it to you, Tiffany, because we were just talking a little bit before we started recording, and I really love where your head is and maybe what you wanted to focus on today.
Yeah, so I think after all of this ADHD information that we've kind of been soaking up, absorbing, I'm still sitting, like, if I'm putting myself in someone's shoes that's listening, I'm still wondering, like, when should I start exploring, like, therapy? When should I exploring my options? Where does the line start and stop in terms of, like, oh, this is probably normal stressing stuff versus, like, this might be something I want to explore and check out?
Right. Yeah. And there's all those, there's so many, like you've touched on in past episodes. It's like there's plenty of good information. There's plenty of well-meaning misinformation, and and it's all kind of jumbled up together too.
I love that phrase, well-meaning misinformation. Yeah, I remember thinking, like, when mental health social media became more mainstream, I was like, this is such a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I never remember thinking, oh, this could be like unhelpful at a certain point. Because I just remember like we would see nothing. I don't know if you guys remember like when there was nothing online, like about mental health. It was very like isolated. I don't know if you guys remember this organization. They're still very private, but To Write Love on Her Arms. Like that was my first introduction of any kind of company or social media that had anything to do with like mental health or addiction and just kind of really talking about it versus maybe now where we are in 2024, there's so much, like so much. Like this podcast isn't a very saturated market of like therapists talking about mental health and TikTok and all the videos. So I'd be curious what your guys' thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I admittedly, I hadn't been over to TikTok for a while. Now, that's probably because I'm older. And I mean, I don't know if I'm much older than either of you, but I'm in my 40s, and I know I can tell you that's like my daughter and wife love to look at TikTok. My wife is my age, so
yeah, I've got that baby face where you can never place how old I am, which I love.
That's right.
I love that with clients too. So you never know. No, I'm 29. That's what's funny. It's like I like the beard, but this baby face is confusing. No, I get on TikTok sometimes. I was on it more recently, but I think as we started talking about it here, I started realizing I maybe need to take a break because it just grabs you, right? Like I don't know if you guys know it, but like the way that app works, it's just you just it keeps you there. It doesn't pull you anywhere else.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to grow like Google, you're not going to like when you're on TikTok, you are in that app. It's actually this unique phenomenon where they're not, if you have a Facebook or Instagram, you can get people to your website. TikTok, really not. That's why that TikTok shop is everywhere because they can't get people off the app at the rate of like Instagram, Facebook. That's not why any of us are here today, but I just found that fascinating because it's like, no, they literally know once you're there, you're
there.
And you just go down rabbit hole after rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And when we're going down mental health rabbit holes, that could be helpful or unhelpful. But Tiffany, looks like you maybe had something.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I get on TikTok, I'll watch a video or two, but then I'm instantly overstimulated with like images and like information that I generally don't give a shit about. I'm not gonna lie. So I'm like, I get off really quickly, and then I find myself going like, I generally like I can see how it can be super addicting, but my brain is like, I don't understand how people watch hours of this and like.
Yeah. Well, you have video, you have sound, you have references to pop culture, you have lots of hashtags, you have comments. I mean, they're not usually super long, or if they are, you like go in a series. So I mean, there is a lot there to pull you in, like and keep you. But sorry, David, it sounded like you had something too.
I was just gonna say, like I am certainly I'm on Instagram every day. I'm just looking at stuff. I'm not saying I have amazing content on there by any means. It's probably several years old, whatever content I do have on there. But yeah, gosh, I love finding videos on there, and I just my first reaction, and again, I've only been on TikTok a handful of times over the past years, but it feels like Insta is somehow slightly less overwhelming in its content, but I don't know why. It feels like when I think about it logically, it's like aren't both pretty similar?
Yeah, well, and I wonder if that's just like we all have different brains. Our brains interpret things differently. Like, for example, I can't stand TikTok. Like after 5 or 6 videos, like it's like nails on a chalkboard in my brain.
I
So
can see how
I'm
it'd be overstimulating for sure. I'm just trying to figure out like why is that so hard for? Because I imagine it's the same for me, but it's like what makes Instagram like more palatable or something,
Well, I guess just my opinion would be like the lack of like the sound, the music, like it's just images unless you're choosing to hit play.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie,
true.
the lack of like being able to control the amount of sound that comes at me is really frustrating. I'm like, stop it.
Yeah, that's true. That bit.
It kind of reminds me that I think we all, we've identified we're on the spectrum of ADHD. We're like, I remember all those advice that I would read from therapists or mental health, like sleep, like, oh, you should
Mhm.
never have a TV on, you should never do things. And I was like, I legitimately sleep so much better with something to distract me. Like, I will go to bed earlier. I will like get to sleep faster, like with that slight distraction. And so for me, just 20 minutes of TV, like I'll sit it there and I'm just like, it will be so much faster. But if you talk to a different therapist, somebody may be listening here is like, I will never send a sleep referral to Eric because that's horrible advice. Like, that's okay. But I have found for my neurodiverse clients, they have some sort of similar thing where they had to learn their nervous system, what works for them. And so I
Mhm.
wonder, Tiffany, if it's like, that's just your nervous system, that doesn't work for you versus how it
Yeah.
works for Dave or me. Like, so we almost have that learning of our own systems where I think sometimes we look for a way to make it make sense, but it may just that's what it is, whether or not we have the reasons or the words for it
Yeah.
sometimes.
And I think that's something important to keep in mind. And Dave, you probably can speak a little bit more to this since you're the expert here of like anyone who has ADHD or doesn't, like your nervous system is gonna interpret things differently. So it might work for someone, might not work for another person, and that kind of adds the complexity of how you manage and cope with ADHD.
Right. Well, yeah, and I uh, perhaps just coincidentally, in the past week, I've been reading the book that Jessica McCabe just came out with. She's the How to ADHD YouTube channel. She makes great content. She makes and so far her book I'm about halfway through and it's really good. But I just got through the chapter on sleep, and it's just so validating. It was one of those things where it's like, you've thought this yourself before, you've probably heard it before, but just the way, you know, hearing it from her or the way she said it or something, it was just nice to hear someone else say, like, the traditional methods that you hear that are going to apply to um, neurotypical people aren't necessarily going to apply or won't apply smoothly or well or whatever to people
Mm,
with ADHD. So it's like, the idea of like, no screens 2 hours before bedtime is like laughable. It's, I mean, really for a lot of people, but um, you know, admittedly, like that's the last thing I see before I close my eyes, is like
mhm.
is usually Instagram. So I mean, and I do sleep well, so I can't, I'd never
Yeah.
recommend that to a client, but that's the truth. That's the little
Ooh.
secret behind.
If your clients find this podcast, Dave, they're gonna be like,
I
"Hey,
know,
no, just
I
kidding,
know.
just kidding."
Yeah,
I think you're onto something though. Like we all have to figure out things for ourselves and just what's neurotypical, neurodiverse, and what works and what doesn't. Like I honestly, this is embarrassing to admit, but I thought when people studied, this is not a joke. I thought people were studying for 5 minutes, trying to memorize a few things, and like then everyone's brain shut down in high school. Like I'm being genuine. Like I honestly, when people were like, I studied, I'm like, oh, okay. And my
yeah,
dad sat me down. He's like, you studied? And I'm like, yeah, like what are you supposed to do? And I mean, I don't think he understood. Like I was serious. I wasn't being like a moody teen. And then when I got to college, I mean, you really can't do that for most college. They must say you can do the high school, it's a good high school. But I remember I went to the learning center in college, and this woman, she sat there and she was like, "So this is how you study." Like, I mean, I'm a freshman in college. I graduated high school, and literally, like freshman year of like college, had to sit with someone because I had no idea how to study. I really didn't. I just like I knew you were supposed to read stuff, but I didn't know how you were supposed to retain that. I thought everyone just kind of studied like I did. So
well,
that's
sure.
embarrassing, but that's the truth.
Yeah. No,
All you know. Oh, sorry, go on.
no, I was just gonna say I can 100% relate. Like school, like high school, when I think about it, I was like, I literally flew by the seat of my pants. I do my homework on the bus on ride to school. Like, wouldn't read any of my textbooks, and I got to college, and it was like smacking. It was like someone just threw you into a wall, and I was like, oh, fuck, like this doesn't work anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and I
It's
think most people go for it, Dave.
oh, I was just gonna say, gosh, that takes me back to college. It's like I would go to like the library or the study rooms or something, and it's like I was doing all the right things that seemed to work for other people, but it's like I would go to the library and then still get distracted. And this was well before smartphones or anything. So, I would get distracted by other things, just thoughts, by looking around at people. And it's like even if you go into a study room where there is nothing, it's almost like a sensory deprivation chamber. And it's like, even there, you can't get away from your own thoughts, So it's
Yeah.
it was a real challenge, and it's really frustrating to look around at everyone else and be like, wow, they really seem to be concentrating well here,
Yeah, and I would say like yes, everyone when they make that shift to college or different education, like there's that adjustment period. But I was like, I'm speaking beyond that for just a sec. I was like, I know, like I think what you two had too, where it's like, no, like literally, like we're saying, like there was just not this connection of what other folks were, and so then we're like, oh crap, that really doesn't work for us. And then having to figure it out. Like I just remember, like I had to very much stumble. I knew if I was in the library in the darkest corner by the reference text alone, I would do great. If I was by anybody, I'd find a reason to talk to them because I didn't want to do it. And I had to put music in. It was this very set thing, and usually had to find the deadest hours where nothing was going on because I just struggled. So I think that's one thing about when to go to therapy. I should have gone back then, but I honestly was pretty clueless. And the folks around me identified some of the traits of what I was doing as my personality, not a symptom of a mental health diagnosis or something. So I'm talking family, talking, I'm in the psychology department, for God's sakes. And they just, no one like thought to mention, hey, like maybe talk to somebody, maybe explore. So I think that's just one where like I was noticing some academic struggles pretty intensely, really not understanding how to proceed, which for me does line up where I think most people's first experience in therapy is college. So they go and there's a university counseling center, it's part of tuition or whatever. So I went for a few times, and that was super helpful and helped me, at least for me personally, break the ice of getting into therapy personally. I already kind of wanted to do it professionally. That was super helpful. So I didn't, and not to put you guys on the spot, but I line up with that. First time in therapy is college. You go to college, then you start to work out or work on some of the things that you've been carrying.
Yeah. As we're talking about this really brings me into because I think it was a little bit longer of a journey for me to figure out how to study, and it never fails to blow people's mind. But if I don't have a moving image to pair with whatever it is I'm listening to when I'm studying, I cannot recall the information. So like the way I studied for my master's exam was I played video games while listening to the audio version, and I would replay the game in my mind in order to recall the information because the first two times I like sat down, I read it, I did flashcards, and I was like, I don't remember shit. Nothing stuck.
Yeah, that is clever though. Pairing it with video games, that's kind of bold, isn't it? It's like, to think, it's like we know that that's not actually all that, that's probably not actually all that uncommon, but it's like, I don't know, just hearing that the way I was brought up, and if you told that to a parent, at least when I was a kid, they would have laughed at you. They would have been like,
Probably.
no, you're trying not to study,
No,
But
I love that.
I can see how it'd help. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think it too, like I'm a very image-based person, so like if I don't have images, I'm like, what's happening? What's going on?
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I wish I would have tried that really.
That sounds so much classier than what I currently do. I listen to the clubbist, trashiest club music, and that's what allows me to focus. And I'm not kidding. Like if I'm really trying to focus these days, it is just like the club, like the dirtiest club music, just and I'm like sitting there like, yeah, like so taxes. And I don't know why, but there's something I was like, I'm so distracted by so I think video game sounds a lot more eloquent than me sitting here like just doing this. Like not that there's anything wrong with that music, but it's just funny to me.
I can't do the music. Like whenever I put on music, I get so engrossed in the music that everything else just like I forget about what I'm doing.
like even if it doesn't have words, like because I found that like,
Yes.
really active, it's like I found that like electronica, like techno music of some sorts, like I can do that as long as they're not singing, as long as there's no words to it. It's like play that pretty loud, and it's stimulating enough, and it drowns out everything else in the background too. So that's my music.
See,
I bet
the
it's
play music is
something with the
easier.
beats. Yeah, I think the beats pull me back because I'm gonna get distracted. So then when I hear them, oh, okay. And I do listen to the same songs,
Oh yeah,
so
of
I'm less
course.
distracted. So it's like the same 10 songs. I'm just like I kind of know. I'm like, oh, okay,
I've heard that's an
that's
ADHD
fun.
thing, or maybe an altogether neurodivergent thing to have, just a few songs, or maybe even one song that you've been listening to over and over again,
Oh,
you know, or at least a lot more than all the other songs you listen to. So I know that resonates with me.
tracks. It tracks, right? So that was one I just thought I'd throw out, like with school, notice it with academic settings, kind of noticing like, ooh, this is getting harder. You've heard Tiffany say it already today, like talking about getting like overstimulated. So we're talking about getting like overstimulated. It's just like you can't focus in the moment. You cannot retain new information. You're not able to hear what someone is saying, what the TV show is saying, what your instructor is saying, your manager. Like that's the point we're talking about. And I'm really wanting to be specific because I get frustrated when people say, "Oh, I'm so overstimulated." I'm like, "No, you're just tired." Like that's not the same thing. Or no, like you just dealt with something a lot. Overstimulation, I'm not trying to be the overstimulation gatekeeper, but I think we just have used that term too broadly for like
Yeah,
anything that's not normal, calm is overstimulation. I think that almost means it lose its meaning. I'd be curious what you guys
sure.
think.
Well, yeah, I mean, something I go over with most clients is that phenomenon of like, if you talk to, and so many people, especially if they've haven't been diagnosed until adulthood, so many people have had that experience of talking to a friend, a family member who they trust, who is, and it is an honest conversation between the two people, but it's like they don't go into the details. So the conversation looks like, well, the person with ADHD is like, well, or, but doesn't like know it yet or something, is like, gosh, do you have trouble like paying attention sometimes? And the other person's like, yeah, of course, we all have trouble paying attention sometimes. And oh, do you have trouble with this other thing? Oh yeah, that happens to me too. you know Everyone has, that's the tricky part. It's like, if you talk to anyone, they're not lying either. It's true, everyone has all these little symptoms, but they don't have them as symptoms, but it's like they have these experiences that people with ADHD have. But the thing you never get into when you're talking to people in your daily life is like, okay, so like what percentage of the time does this happen to you? And how much does it interfere with your day-to-day life? You know, no one ever has that conversation because that's not how we talk to people. But it's like, that's the clinical stuff that's like usually makes the difference. And I mean, I know I have the book right here, like Russell Barkley had at least in his Taking Charge of Adult ADHD book, um, in the back of it, it has like this nice layout of like just all these different qualities, all these different challenges that that people without ADHD, like adults without ADHD, run into, and like what percentage of adults without ADHD have this experience, um, or what percentage of the time, I guess, is it a challenge for them versus people with ADHD. And it's drastically different. It's like, for something, yeah, it's like, adults with ADHD for a certain symptom are like, they have this problem like 87% of the time versus just adults in the community without ADHD 7%. So it's like, that's where you get into it. But that's how you can so easily feel like, well, they get all the people around me say they get distracted too, and they get overwhelmed with things too, and
Yes.
overstimulated and whatnot. And it's like, and so it must just be me. Why can't I handle it the way everyone else can? And it's like, because
Mm,
they're only experiencing it every once in a while.
Yeah, I love how you said that. Like everyone's feeling that, but it's not like at the same level or frequency. Go for it,
Right.
Tiffany.
Yeah, so I have something that I'm genuinely curious, since you're the ADHD expert, if it would be considered ADHD or if it's just a common occurrence in people in general. But
Hmm.
how many times have you encountered individuals who ask you of like, "Oh, I'm listening to someone talk," and then like my mind goes blank and I start thinking about something else, and before you know it, they're staring at me because they're done talking, and all I can think about is I have no fucking clue what they just said.
Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah, I mean, I know. Wouldn't it have been hilarious if I had that experience right then and there, but I didn't. But thankfully, right? But yeah, I mean, that's a very common, and again, I think it's something that everyone has probably had that experience at some point in their life. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's where their mind goes when you ask a crowd of people that or something. It's like, oh yes, that has
Oh,
happened to me. But it's like that's happened to me, like, if not today, like in the past few days, like, that, or I would say on any given day, that probably happens at least once. So anyway, I guess I'm just saying, and I hear it so often from other adults with ADHD. I mean, right, it's not an official symptom, but again, I would always ask someone, like, how often does that happen to you? It's like a handful of times in your life, or like a handful of times in your week, you know,
Mm-hmm. So
or
just so
more.
that, yeah, just like to pick that apart, maybe clarify for some of our listeners, like, are there other mental health concerns that could contribute or mimic causing that symptom?
Yes, that's a very good question. It's like people with, and I'm trying to think. I think what complicates it is that any of these things that can mimic it, you can have both, you know, and so
Mm-hmm.
that can be really tricky to weed out. Such a, um, is this from a past a trauma? You know, is this anxiety, or depression, or it's like there's so many different, or I don't know if there's so many, but there's some big, quite likely things that, and so many people with ADHD do have depression and or anxiety. So
Mm-hmm.
it can be, but then plenty of people just have depression or just anxiety, you know? So yeah, I mean, I know that's such a murky answer, but it's like, um,
Yeah,
it's
but it
just,
kind
yeah,
of
it is tricky.
gives, yeah, but it kind of gives like, hopefully it gives our listeners an idea of like, at least this is a starting point of like maybe it's something to explore like in general within the realm if they're uncomfortable with the idea of like maybe I have ADHD. Maybe
Sure.
you don't. Maybe you have some other comorbid things or whatever else is
Right.
happening.
Right. And I mean, I think with some things, at least I'm thinking, like, something I tell people, because I can go through the process with people if they are seeking like a diagnosis. I can do that, but there's some people who are pretty sure they have ADHD, and I'm not a, you know, I'm not a prescriber anyway, so they can't get medication from me. So um, I tell them, you know, if you're just pretty sure and you don't need a official diagnosis and you just want to treat the symptoms, if you just want to treat the symptoms, so to speak, work on the problems that you're having, the places in your life where you're having trouble concentrating or trouble structuring your day, or other things. It's like, um, you can do that. Anyone can do that without an official diagnosis. Like, you only need an official diagnosis, most likely, to get medication or to get accommodations, which might happen at like a university or a school or workplace or something like that. But it's like
Mm.
otherwise, and even those, I would never recommend a doctor who would prescribe uh, without a diagnosis. But let's be real, I guess, they're probably out there. And Like you hear about people who've just gone in
yeah.
and talked to their doctor, and it's like, yeah, it's probably ADHD. Here, try this, you know? And it's like, wow, okay, that's part of the problem, but we know they're out there.
They absolutely are. I think there's just this challenge of folks who haven't been diagnosed and are trying to get treated. And I got to be real, the people who are not actually legitimately having these symptoms are what are making this so hard, because there is a huge uptick of people like, I have ADHD, I need Adderall. Like, I mean, that is the conversation. Like, I have ADHD, I have ADHD. And it's like, I believe there are some folks being left out and not getting the care, but that really is, that's why I'm even pissed just talking about it, because it's like there are folks who really do need to get in and get their services and have that experience, but because so many folks are like, well, I have this, it's hard to focus.
Right.
No doubt we all have difficulty with certain things, but it's just, there's just no spectrum with it. It's like, oh yeah, I've had trouble focusing before. Like, not to mention, like, Adderall could be a very helpful thing, but even if you have ADHD, that may not be the best thing because there's other side effects. But it's just this whole conversation. So I feel for the people who are really trying to get their needs met with those symptoms legitimately, because there's all these changes that have been made even in the past couple of years because people were sadly abusing this accommodations and medications, and so not to go off on a huge, I mean, I feel frustrated for the folks who really need it, and I'm equally frustrated with the folks who keep making it harder because they're misusing a system that's not for them, essentially.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that really makes me think about individuals, and I think this is like the high school, middle school individuals that come to mind when they feel personally that they're managing their symptoms really well and they're comfortable with how they're doing. But the individuals around them disagree and they put them on meds or they get them started on meds. And I can see like that comes to mind in terms of adding to that problem, adding to that situation where they're probably not saying everyone does it, but maybe not using their medications or giving access to someone who doesn't need it and things of that nature.
Yeah. Gosh, I've heard of, like, possibly in some of those situations, yeah, like to your point, they might be hiding the medication instead of, or, flushing it or something instead of taking it. And, because they've heard now, I guess the ones I'm thinking of, like, the one I've heard of is like where, as far as I can tell, it's like they probably did have ADHD, but they didn't want to be medicated. And then, it's understandably, I would think, okay, then let's not try and force you to medicate if you're not willing to. But
Yeah. Have you ever worked with teens and parents where their parent is kind of pushing them to be medicated and the teen is kind of like, yeah, no, like I'm cool being with what I am?
I mean, I don't presently work with teens. I only work with adults. In
That's
the
right,
past,
Dave.
in the past, I have worked with teens and adults, but not, I would say probably just a handful of kids with ADHD at that time. That was so many years ago. And so no, I guess I can't really speak to, I don't recall any like that, but I'm sure it happens.
I think what
Parents,
else amazed. Sorry, go, Dave. Go.
no, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, like, plenty of parents seem to bring their kids to counseling, when it's like you get the whole family in there for a session or two, and it's like, I'm not sure who really needs the counseling here. It's like, this is just, it's something to look at. And plenty of parents are open to that, I should say. Plenty of parents are like, oh, okay, yeah, fair enough. But then there's plenty that are just like, it comes across as like, here, fix my kid. When it's like, well, it's going to be hard when you're not willing to make your own changes too. They're just adapting to living in this situation.
I won't lie, that is one of the reasons I transitioned away from working with kiddos and families, is I encountered so many reluctant families to change the whole system because the system is ultimately what's causing the behaviors of everyone. And it's that same thing that you mentioned of like, fix my kid. And I'm like, this isn't a broken issue.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It gets really frustrating and it can be really sad too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just sitting here. I'm like, I have yet to have met a therapist that used to work with kids or teens and not left because of the parents. Like, legitimately, I actually was sitting here when you guys are saying it. I was like, I have not met a single person who has not left it for that very reason. Like, I'm honestly thinking, I can't think of anyone that said, "Oh, I just really want to work with adults." Like, literally every time I've heard someone say, "I used to work with kids, I don't," or teens, is parents. And so there's just a giant PSA out there. Parent myself, like, you could advocate for your kids and not be disruptive to the work. And so I think that's heartbreaking to me, because there are some incredible therapists that your kids literally will never have access to because of how horrible parents are in this current moment, beyond just therapy. I think of teachers. Unfortunately, they can't say, "I'm only going to teach college students." Now it's like, "Hey, I'm out." Like, I think of the folks who have just left because it's like parents are just collectively being more and more horrible all the time. It
Yeah.
seems like
And
so.
it's, I guess, just a shout out to and you know this too. I think you're a parent now as well, right? So, um, I guess it's like those of us who are good, who are trying to be good parents to our kids. Yeah, it's like we're getting overshadowed, of course, by the people who are loud and who are obnoxious and
Absolutely.
so it's like I'm not saying there's no good parents out there. I'm saying the
Yes.
ones that are hard to work with are so hard to work with that, like, yes, I agree, so many people leave working with kids because of these, even if it's a minority of parents, it's still just so overpowering,
Yeah.
Yes.
That small slice is so awful that folks would rather completely change who they work with than deal with them,
right.
which is quite a
Yeah.
statement. But I don't think
Yeah.
this is just true. Anyway, sorry. I was like, if I'm sure, I know we have our therapist colleagues listening to this, and there's a few folks that are probably out there, but I just like, man, how upset is that? Because, man, there are some incredible ADHD therapists that folks will never get to work with because they don't want to deal with the parents. And I'm just like,
Hmm.
that kind of just breaks
Mm,
my heart a little bit, truly, it just does, because I'm like, that is how dysfunctional this has all gotten a little bit.
yeah.
But kind of maybe bringing it back to stuff of like knowing when to need therapy, it's disruptive to your family life, like, do you have to go to a certain, like, there's all these like routines and patterns or things that just, it's really disruptive, maybe for your kid, for your
Hmm.
family, for maybe yourself. I tend to get a lot of adults with ADHD, and it's like how they interact with their kids is one of the things. They're like, wow, I shouldn't be so reactive to this, or I
Hmm.
shouldn't be so overwhelmed by little noises or things not going to plan, kind of stuff. Tiffany, you look like you
Right.
got something.
I had a thought in terms of like, Dave, I don't know if you've worked with parents who also have kids that have ADHD, but if you have, how often have you heard the like, my kid just can't fucking behave? Like, gosh dang, their behavior is crazy. Like, they don't listen. Like, nothing works. Like, it goes over their head. And I'm just curious,
Hmm.
like, how often is that something that you see?
Gosh, I mean, I see that a lot, and that's I think it's true to what other I think I read about this, probably from several of the big authors on ADHD, the big experts, and just the fact that like so many adults don't realize they have ADHD or their partner has ADHD until their kid gets diagnosed, and
Oh,
and then they're told about the genetic component and they're learning about all of these symptoms and stuff, and it's like, oh, okay, wait a sec, so maybe and sometimes it's like both of us have ADHD and our kid does, and like um what a discovery to make, for one thing. I mean, both uh jarring and good to know, for sure. It would be
World changing.
yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I see it a lot, and I I think of and being a parent with ADHD, um, with a kid with ADHD, um, it's I'm not going to say it's as challenging now that he's like a teenager, but which might be weird to hear, but it's he's a really easygoing teenager. It's really but
Those exist.
yeah, I know, right? It's like really smart, and I mean, I know everyone kid is smart, but from what I can tell, he's like really pretty smart. And yeah, but anyway, but it is very, it's like when we go out on like shopping for his clothes, we are like so discombobulated, like two guys who like, you know, neither one of us has a system for this. Neither one of us has like any rhyme or reason to how we do this. And so it's, like the only plan is we are going to go into that store and get some clothes for you. And you can tell that that's all the plan is when we just kind of walk around somewhat aimlessly. And it's funny really, but that's why I bring it up. That's like, on a more serious note, it's like, that's where it's interesting to observe my son and see like his, especially how, I guess I would say, disorganized he is. And he would, he would agree with this, but it's like, I guess it's nice that he is growing up with it, with knowing about it from such an early age. I didn't know about it until I was in 10th grade, and I would say I didn't really know about what it meant until really until adulthood, until after college. I didn't really take it all that seriously, but like he's going to know. And but when he has challenges, they're not going to be attributed to something he's doing wrong, and that's great. I think that's awesome.
I like that positivity, Dave, of like how things are growing and better. And I just think maybe it's something I would throw out is like, if you're listening and you're on the fence about, do I need therapy? Do I need to take? Most therapists have free consultations, like completely free. I mean, they're not an hour, but 10, 15 minutes. I mean, I'm not going to speak for Dave and Tiffany, but I'm sure you guys in 10 to 15 minutes, like you talk to somebody, you ask some questions, you can be like, yeah, I think therapy could help.
Right.
That's a great way just to find out, and just talk to somebody. I know that may feel scary, but the worst thing that happens is you talk to somebody and you're like, you know what, I don't think I need this, or they tell you that, or like, I think you need this therapist. That happens all the time, like all the time, steering to the direction.
Yeah, I always tell people, like, my biggest fear for anyone calling in, my biggest concern, or for anyone who schedules a fun consult, is like, I don't want them to ever feel pressured into signing up for counseling. It's like, I am truly also trying to find out if we'd be a good fit, if I can provide what they're looking for, if they need counseling even. It's like, there have been people who are like, I don't really, have the time, or I don't have the energy or the money or whatever at this time. And I said, well, hey, have you seen like there's some pretty good workbooks on this too. It's like, if you can motivate yourself to go through a workbook, you can do that for 25, 35 bucks. That's well less than a single session. And it's like, you might be able to afford that, even if you can't afford full on therapy right now, So it's not always, therapy is not always the answer. It's like, it's okay to have a free consult. There's no pressure into counseling from that,
Yeah. And to play off that, like, I'm not up to date on all the resources, but I know we're adding a lot to our Patreon list that has been recommended by all of our experts here. But I've been noticing that there's a lot of master classes and online trainings and workbooks and Instagram accounts that have free worksheets and exercises and tips. So there is a lot of free resources out there to those that like can't actually afford therapy, that they can still get their foot in the door.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not a car dealership pressure sale. Like we're gonna ask you to insure the paint and insure your insurance on the paint and stuff, and then see about all this crap you don't need. Like therapy is pretty well regulated, fairly regulated to like even how we can advertise ourselves. So like it just shouldn't feel that way. So I guess if you were looking for a red flag, if it's feeling like that, I mean, whether you're overwhelmed, not a decision to make, maybe not a space to make a decision, take that space, but just want to throw that out there because I'm like, honestly, like so many people I know are therapists, but so many of the best people I know are therapists, and they care so much about their clients, or prospective clients, that they're not willing to leverage themselves to just get one person. Because honestly, that person isn't going to stay. They're not going to be successful. And like literally in this work, we want you to be successful. We want you to achieve your goals because that's our job. So sorry, that's the last thing I had today. I just wanted to throw that out there because I was like, I really want to speak to the people who are maybe right on the edge and trying to figure out what they do, because I think I've been there. So I get that. And, I think it's, there's no right or wrong way to be, but I remember that feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it's hard to, it's challenging to find, even as a therapist, it is challenging to find a therapist. So even more so if you're not a therapist, of course, and it's like just in our busy daily schedules, everyone, speaking to everyone here, it's like it's hard to look for a counselor and then to contact them and then to hear back from them. It's a big executive functioning nightmare to try and set up counseling, treatment for ADHD. Just one of the many terribly ironic things about ADHD treatment, just like trying to go through the process to get meds and then to remember to take your meds and all that stuff. It's all not in line. It's like, how are you going to get ADHD treatment if you haven't learned how to treat your ADHD yet? Is kind of the ironic thing, right?
Yeah. Well, we could talk about this all day. We love having
Yes.
interesting discussions. But Dave, what are some tidbits, some advice, some of the most important golden kernels of truth that you want to leave with our listeners today?
I would say, speaking as someone who I knew about my ADHD so relatively early compared to so many people I talked to, and yet I didn't take it seriously. It was truly words on a page. Okay, I have ADHD. That's why it's hard to pay attention a little bit or something, is what I thought it meant. I tell people when they come to me, if they tell me they have ADHD, or if we find out they have ADHD, I say, this is big. Like, this can really affect your life. Take this very seriously, because it can, if it's not acknowledged, if it's not managed, it's like it can really get in the way, which can lead to very low self-esteem, major problems in your life. And it's not to say it's going to do that regardless. It's to say, like, if it's unacknowledged, if you have these, challenges coming up in your life, it's not your fault, which doesn't mean you get to just be like, hey, sorry, I got ADHD, so I can't do that thing. But it is to say, here's why it's a challenge for me. Here's why it's really hard. And I think, that speaks to a lot of people are afraid of using, that they'll be like come across as using ADHD as like an excuse or something. And that's fair. It's true. You don't want to be able to, ADHD, just like anything else, shouldn't be this catch-all that's like, hey, sorry, I can treat you this way because I have ADHD. Sorry I didn't call you back. I'm just the kind of friend who never calls back because I have ADHD, and that's what you get from me. It's like, well, no, let's try and work on that. Still no one's going to want to have a friend who just doesn't ever reply to them, You're not going to want a partner who has ADHD and uses that as their excuse for not doing any chores. It's like, you still got to do the chores. It's just going to be more of a challenge. That's the thing. I mean, I think so many partners hear the partner saying, I found that I have ADHD. And it's like, okay, so let's be clear. That still means chores aren't getting done. It's like at the end of the day, but one of the authors talks about that, Melissa Orlov. She talks about it in relationships, and she says, at the end of the day, you're still stuck with, it's like one of you still feels neglected because the other one's always running around doing stuff and has 10,000 tasks that they're, jumping from task to task because they have ADHD, but it's like the other partner still feels lonely. So you still have to deal with that. Like ADHD is not an excuse. It's an explanation as to why that is hard to deal with. So obviously I could go on and on too.
There's a reason that we're coming up with soapboxes for me, because I like to go onto certain things. So we'll get those out there.
Yeah.
For the 5 people that want them.
Stay in tune for our soapboxes.
I know.
We literally just no filters, all out aggression.
Everybody's just getting up for Christmas.
Nice.
We're going to give them to everybody. Surprise, surprise. Well, this was lovely to have you, Dave. Thank you so much. And we'll have to get you back on for a different topic sometime.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Deciphering Growth. We hope you found our conversation helpful and insightful. Subscribe to our podcast for more episodes and check out our Patreon for more content. Don't hesitate to contact us on social media if you have any questions or comments. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep growing.